Before Dress to Kill, Kiss was on the verge of a collapse. They had a struggling record label, financial troubles, and rushed production. Yet this album would give birth to their most iconic song. Most of us think of the band Kiss and we think they are a bunch of rich rock stars. Well, that's true and probably was true for a large part of their career. But like most bands, there was a time when they were struggling, and in early 1975, they were still trying to make ends meet, while at the same time trying to release albums on a consistent basis. The band had already released 2 albums in the year 1974, which was the self-titled album Kiss and Hotter Than Hell. The debut album Kiss did pretty well, but it wasn't a breakout hit. The album peaked at number 97 on the Billboard 200 and stayed on the charts for 23 weeks. The album was certified gold, but it didn't have any hit singles, which is surprising because nowadays you listen to the album and it sounds like a greatest hits album. There was one single, Kiss in Time, but that only reached number 83. Songs eventually became more popular as they later became live staples, but it's hard to believe that songs like Strutter and Deuce were not hit singles back in the day. Then they released Hotter Than Hell towards the end of the year. This one did worse than the debut. It only peaked at number 100 on the Billboard 200 and spent 15 weeks on the chart. Despite this, it was eventually certified gold. The label Casablanca was also struggling after the release of Hotter Than Hell, as the label split with Warner Brothers. But over the years, many fans consider Hotter Than Hell one of their best albums, and it had a few live staples such as Parasite and the title track Hotter Than Hell. But now it's time for the third album, Dress to Kill, but there were a few problems. In early 1975, they had spent most of their earnings from touring on their stage shows and promotional costs. If you take a look at the album cover, you'll see them dressed in suits, but the truth was that Peter Criss was the only member to actually own a suit. And the same can be said for the label Casablanca Records. They were also having financial difficulties. But their president, Neil Bogart, was determined to create a hit record and save the label. So the band was ready to record the third album, Dress to Kill, but unfortunately, Casablanca Records could not afford to hire a producer, so Neil Bogart produced the album despite his lack of expertise in music production. When I did my research, I found it surprising that the band recorded the entire album in just 10 days. The recording process took place from February 8th to February 18th in 1975 at Electric Lady Studios in New York City. They decided to record the album quickly for 2 reasons. One was because they were on a limited budget, and 2, they needed to get it out to start making sales. According to Paul Stanley, Neil Bogart was more interested in saving money than he was making a quality album. Fortunately for the band, there will be one song on this album that will later become one of the most popular songs, and possibly the song that defines the band. But the band did the best they could with limited resources. For example, Ace Frehley recorded his guitar parts using a speaker enclosed in a cardboard box that was a makeshift amplifier shell. There are also a few songs that were written very quickly, such as Ladies in Waiting, which was written and recorded in a single afternoon. The band also tried to be creative throughout the recording process. For example, Paul Stanley played lead guitar in the intro, Come On and Love Me, and Gene Simmons played rhythm guitar on Ladies in Waiting. There were even acoustic guitars on tracks such as Anything for My Baby, which was inspired by the band Bachman-Turner Overdrive. They even got roadies involved as they helped creating sound effects by pulling the zippers on their leather jackets like this, like up and down, and to make this rhythmic noise. They did that on Rock and Roll All Night, although I never really noticed it. I'll have to listen and try to pay attention for that. But in the end, they finished the album. It ended up being the shortest album. It's just a 30-minute runtime. Then there was the album cover. This was a very iconic image. The idea for the photo originated from a Cream magazine project where Kiss was to appear in a comic strip. The story was the band disguised themselves as normal people, but they would later transform themselves into rock superstars and save the world with rock and roll. This was inspired by Clark Kent and Superman. The photo was taken by Bob Gruen, and the band liked the photo so much they decided to use it for their album cover. And this was the reason they named the album Dress to Kill. The photograph took place in New York City on the southwest corner of 23rd Street and 8th Avenue near Electric Lady Studios. And as I mentioned before, Peter Criss owned the suit, so they had to borrow suits from the manager Bill Aucoin, and photographer Bob Gruen even lent one of his suits, as well as a few neckties. The clogs that Gene is wearing were lent to him by Bob Gruen's wife, and the rest of the album was a minimalistic design. It had an embossed title in black on the border around the photo. Now it's time to release the album. Was released on March 19, 1975, which, by the way, just celebrated 50 years. The album performed modestly. It peaked at number 32 on the Billboard 200, and that was their highest charting album at the time. The album has some memorable tracks. For example, it opens with Room Service, which is a typical Kiss sounding song with Paul on vocals. There was Two Timer, had Gene on vocals, those typical Gene lyrics. Ladies in Waiting was very typical Kiss sounding with Gene on vocals. Getaway was another pretty cool track. Had this rock and roll vibe with Peter on vocals. There was a pretty memorable acoustic intro on the track Rock Bottom. And there are a few tracks which, for me, I thought were more forgettable, such as Anything for My Baby with Paul on vocals and Love Her All I Can, which has a very funky 70s sound with Gene on vocals. But the album also has one of their best deep cuts called She, probably one of the heaviest songs, and has some of the most memorable guitar riffs. And this song would eventually be covered by various metal bands, including Anthrax, who covered the song on their 1994 Kiss cover compilation album called Kiss My Ass. They released two singles. The first one was Come On and Love Me. It failed to chart, although it later became a live staple and fan favorite. Then there was the big song Rock and Roll All Night. It was released as a single on April 2nd, 1975, and had Getaway as the B-side. This is their signature track and one of the songs people know most from the band, but you might be surprised because the first time they released it as a single, it only reached number 68 on the Billboard Hot 100. But then a couple months later, they re-released the song, or a live version of the song, on October 14, 1975, and that was the version from their album Alive, which would come out later in September. The live version was their big hit. It reached number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1976. It was their first top 20 hit and the song that propelled them to superstardom. Rock and Roll All Night later became the defining anthem. It became the song that they played to close out like almost every concert since. After this, they would have released their breakout album Alive on September 10th, 1975, and I will make a video for that on its anniversary. But in the meantime, check out this video right here. I did this for their next studio album, which is called Destroyer. That was released on March 15, 1976, and I did that video about 4 years ago when it celebrated its 45th anniversary. So that one's going to be right here. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. Please like the video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you've not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. And thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.